Hello and welcome to the Atoll, your home for Waterworld fandom. In today's greatly anticipated deep dive video, we will be looking at everything we know about the Smoker's floating fortress known as the Deez, from how the giant sets and miniatures were created and brought to life through the film, to where the Deez fits within the greater Waterworld lore. We will then conclude the video with the absolutely fascinating story about what happened to the Deez after the production of Waterworld wrapped. So without further ado, let's get this tub of shit up to speed. In the film, the first reference to the Deez is after the Deacon has interrogated the two captured Atollers. The Deacon says, quote, "When we get back to the Deez, take out that skyboat, send it out on patrol. We gotta keep an eye out for that ichthy freak." In the next scene with the Deacon, we are actually aboard the Deez, as the Doc finishes up his final paint strokes on the Deacon's new prosthetic eye. This room, known as the Infirmary, was filmed in Hawaii at Kauai Harbor. Many of the interior sets of the Deez were created and filmed in a vacant sugar shack that stood on the harbor docks. And it's interesting to note that in the theatrical version of the film, we are introduced to the Deez in short scenes throughout the film, but only with interior sets. In fact, to first-time viewers of Waterworld, they may not even know what the exterior of the Smoker's lair even looks like until the final third of the film, when the mariner approaches the hull of a tattered ship, and a minute later, we are given this wide shot of the Deez in a grand reveal that the Smokers in fact live upon the remains of an ancient oil tanker. And actually, I think this approach works much better by building up the mystery of where the Smokers reside. The extended version of the film reuses wide shots of the Deez from the end of the film, shots like the Deez in the fog and the Deez being paddled, as establishing shots throughout the entire film. Regardless, after the Deacon rejects the Doc's handiwork, he is informed by the Smoker tallyman that there is a problem in the pit. The Deacon takes to his Deacon-mobile and drives through the bowels of the Deez in style, while handing out cigarettes to his Smoker compatriots. Check out my video on the Deacon-mobile if you'd like an entire deep dive on this most memorable post-apocalyptic automobile. And I would just like to call out this very interesting establishing shot that first focuses on some smokers smelting a batch of fresh bullets, then cranes up past a lateral beam to another floor on the Deez where we see the Deacon-mobile rumble by. In actuality, this is a trick VFX shot. The second floor of the Deez never really existed, and when the camera passes over the beam, it actually serves as a clever way to join two different shots of what is actually the same corridor set, just shot from different angles. And very interestingly, in the extended cut of the film, they actually use the unedited version of the shot earlier in the film that reveals that there is in fact no second floor of the set. And this is the largest of the interior sets, measuring nearly 300 feet in length. The set construction crew also used forced perspective, an optical illusion that makes objects look closer or further away from the camera to make the catacombs of the Deez lower decks appear more vast. Concept artist Steve Berg has said that his initial drawings of the ship fortress were designed to look like a skull with big holes all over it. The set builders also chose to make the Deez look like it had sections cut out of it to emphasize the fact that the Smokers are literally cutting apart their home in order to forge more ammunition for their weapons. This, combined with the dwindling supply of fossil fuels, shows the unsustainable lifestyle of the Smokers and underpins the environmental subtext of the film. Through the holes in the set, the film crew placed powerful camera lights to create the illusion that hot shafts of sunlight are permeating down into the bowels of the Deez. After the rousing drive about the lower decks of the Deez, the Deacon and his entourage arrive at the storeroom, and in the storeroom we can see boxes of Smirnoff, Bacardi, Jack Daniels, and the lesser-known brand that the Nord is tossing back is called Black Death Vodka. Shout out to the Mad Max Minute for pointing this one out to me. Also, among the booze are many boxes of the Smoker's primary source of substance, Smeat. And you will also notice that in the darkness of the background there's a random smoker eating a can of Smeat with a large knife, and strangely enough this is kind of a running gag with several other instances in the film where background smokers are eating Smeat with knives. In the novelization, we are informed that the storeroom is locked, and apart from the Deacon, only a handful of smokers have access to it. The novelization also tells us that the storeroom is replenished through the smokers' raids on atolls. And in the storeroom, we have a pipe that runs down to a lake of oil below. Floating on the surface of the reservoir is what the film credits as the depth gauge guy, which the novelization describes as the smoker with, hands down, the worst job. The actor that plays the human depth gauge is William Peterson, who was a Shakespearean stage actor for much of his life, but then in his older age actually found a fair amount of success playing elderly characters in film and television. He even had a returning character called Carl, Oldy Olsen, on Late Night with Conan O'Brien, where he found himself in a pretty bizarre variety of situations. The human depth gauge informs the Deacon that he is down to 4 feet 9 inches of black stuff. The Deacon realizes that the smokers are depleting their vital fuel that keeps their society surviving, and so he decides to cancel any tractor pulls or any other unnecessary uses of gasoline and to place all their efforts into finding Enola and the map to dry land. The next time we are aboard the Deez is after the smoker scout plane has made its near-fatal encounter with the Trimaran. We find ourselves in the Deacon's quarters where he is plotting his next attack on the Trimaran. In the extended cut of the film, this scene is much longer and gives us more time with the Deacon and the smoker scout plane pilot. We begin with the Deacon practicing his golf swing, toppling over a stack of Smeat cans. Because of his newly missing eye, the Deacon does not notice that the smoker pilot is sitting in the room with him. After the Nord informs him that he is sitting on the couch behind him, the Deacon asks him where he has spotted the Trimaran. The pilot, who is played by a young Jack Black, laments the death of his friend Ed and informs the Deacon of the Trimaran's location and heading on the chart. What is slightly baffling in the extended cut of the film is how this scene is split in two, with nearly a 10-minute gap before cutting back to it. This sort of pacing issue is why I prefer the theatrical cut over the extended cut of the film. But before we move on from this scene, I just wanted to point out some of the set dressing here in the Deacon's quarters. Check out the seahorse sculpture, disco ball, and American political mat. He has an ancient television playing a worn-out VHS of a golf tournament, and above is his shrine to an illustration of a golf course he dreams of building on dry land. In the novelization, the Deacon's quarters are even more grand, with a chandelier, orange shag rug, velvet illustration of Elvis, and a Rembrandt painting. We don't see the Deez again until after the Deacon has captured Enola and destroyed the Trimaran. The Deacon reports to the prison cell aboard the Deez. In the extended cut of the film, we're given a little extra at the beginning of the scene, with the Deacon mobile crashing into a pile of trash and the Deacon jumping out and consulting with his smoker cohorts. The doc suggests that they use a toxin to make Enola tell the truth about the tattoo on her back, and in the novelization, this truth serum is extracted from a pufferfish. The Deacon enters the cell and offers Enola a cigarette. He explains the dilemma of his so-called Church of Eternal Growth, which has created overpopulation on the Deez, and his sole solution is to continue expanding after he has found dry land. He asks Enola if she knows how to use her tattoo to get there, to which she replies no. The Deacon flips out at the mention of the Mariner and chains Enola back up. Later on, the Deacon has moved Enola to his quarters on the bridge of the Deez. The Nord and the Doc are studying the map tattoo on Enola's back, discussing the best way to get a good look at it. The Deacon enters the room and addresses a photograph on the wall labeled Captain Joe Hazelwood. More on this interesting historical reference in just a minute. The next time the Deez makes its final and by far most substantial appearance is in the culminating act of the film when it becomes the central set piece of the movie. The Mariner tracks down the location of the Deez by following a flaming gasoline trail left by a roving smoker jet ski in a scene that's only present in the extended cut of the film. The Mariner then descends into a large bank of fog. And I really love the Mariner's first encounter with the Deez. From out of the fog, he suddenly comes upon a disorientingly enormous wall rising from the ocean. The Mariner begins to climb the wall, and in the theatrical cut we are given the grand reveal that the smokers live upon an ancient oil tanker, which is presented in this stunning wide shot of the Deez peeking through the fog. And you may be surprised to find out that much of the following action aboard the Deez was not even scripted until the Waterworld production was halfway through its filming schedule in Hawaii, so it deserves noting that much of the footage aboard the Deez was all filmed sequentially after the main phase of production was completed off the Kona coast. In actuality, the side of the Deez that the Mariner climbs was a structure built in a giant water tank, which is a parking lot when it's not in use, on the Paramount Pictures back lot in Hollywood. The wall measured over 30 feet in height and was constructed of wood, with foam barnacles sculpted to its base. The wall extended nearly 100 feet in length and rested in 4.5 feet of water. The structure was stabilized with chains running to concrete buckets beneath and attached to a frame in the back. A few of the shots of the Mariner climbing the side of the Deez were captured with a green screen below, in order to stretch the wall to make it look as if it was 90 feet in height during post-production. And this shot of the Mariner from the side is a composite shot, with the foreground captured on the pool set at Paramount Pictures, and the background being a miniature of the Deez. More on the miniature visual effects in just a minute. During this phase of production in the pool at Paramount Pictures, Southern California was struck by a series of devastating storms in January of 1995. Because of the rain, large tarps were draped over the 140-foot tank in an attempt to shield the set, but enough water came through to soak the wood and bubble the paint. Emergency repairs were made right before shooting. And like the shot in the interior of the Deez, a beam disguises a clever edit between locations as the Mariner climbs the side of the ship. The beginning of the shot looks down at the water below, which was captured in the pool at Paramount Pictures, and as the camera tilts and cranes over a beam, a different shot is spliced in, which is a completely different set in the city of Commerce, California. As the Mariner arrives at the top of the wall, he peers over the edge to see the vast top deck of the Deez. The Deacon walks out onto the bridge of the ship and addresses his Smoker Legion. His followers flock to the base of the bridge and squabble like seagulls over the Smeat that he throws down at the crowd. The set of the deck of the Deez used in the scene is one of the most impressive in the entire production of Waterworld. Constructed in the city of Commerce in August of 1994, this 120-foot wide, 600-foot long set was adjacent to a warehouse that housed many of the film's interior sets. The set again used forced perspective to make the structure look as if it was actually 900 feet long when viewed from the stern of the ship. The set was built primarily of wood, with the bridge of the ship also being constructed of steel with a concrete foundation. Holes were cut into the deck to suggest entryways into the bowels of the ship, and ironically, no smoking is painted on the bridge of the ship, which is actually a pretty common practice on ships that are carrying flammable cargo. The special effects crew ran pipes throughout the structure so that propane explosions could be detonated. A total of 16 propane tanks would supply the fuel for these explosions during filming. Construction of the deck was completed in mid-November, and filming began in January of 1995. Giant blue tarps were spread around the perimeter of the set to help the rotoscoping team remove the ground surrounding the deck, and a considerable amount of meticulous painting out was done on computers to remove all the surrounding objects and replace the sky. One of the most difficult jobs was rotoscoping the beaded curtain that the Nord and Enola passed through when going out onto the balcony of the Deez. With the sky and ground removed, a company called Arete Associates, a small company that at the time was working with the US government to create water simulations, was brought in by Cinesight to see if they could lend their expertise to the Waterworld production. Before fully signing on, Arete did 4 test shots of different levels of detail, with the last one blowing everybody's mind, proving that CGI water was possible. Markers on the side of the set would allow the compositing team to track the unrestrained Steadicam camera movements and use the motion tracking data to replicate the same movements in the CGI backplates. The artists at Arete imported lens information, sun position, wind speed, and camera motion data to help create the water models for the film. The CGI team chose to create an artificial depth of field as well, which in turn decreased the costly computer render times by introducing a defocused horizon line. Even achieving lifelike highlights and shimmers off the crests of the waves was considered quite an accomplishment for the time of the film's release. The creation of CGI water in Waterworld is considered a true milestone in computer VFX work, as it marks the first time an entire CGI ocean was created and implemented into a live-action plate, 2 years before James Cameron's Titanic, which also used Arete software. Maclifx also composited computer-generated fog and smoke into many of the shots throughout the sequence, many of which required match camera movement. And it should be noted that the close-ups of the Deacon and his entourage on the balcony were captured from a duplicate set that was created in studio and in actuality existed only a few feet off the ground, making it easy for the camera crew to capture the actions without large cranes. This indoor set also allowed the production crew to work through the bout of bad weather in January of 1995. A total of 40 shots were captured from this duplicate set and composited into backplates. During the filming in Commerce, hundreds of smoker extras were recruited to create the massive crowd captivated by the Deacon's preachings, though painted plywood cutouts of smokers were also added to the background of wide shots to emphasize the overpopulation of the Deez. According to production notes, the Deez was meant to be populated by 5,000 smokers. The Mariner then noticed 2 smoker patrols have found his abandoned jet ski. The Mariner dives off the edge of the Deez, pulling the smokers underwater. And while I could not find any specific information on this shot, it is clearly some kind of green screen compositing trick. As you can see, the Mariner is not casting any shadows on the ground, and the perspective is just slightly off. The underwater shots of the Mariner drowning the smokers were captured in Hawaii during a bad day of weather on the shoot. Director of photography Dean Semler suggested to Peter Romano, director of underwater photography, to use the downtime to capture the underwater drowning, because even if they had poor visibility in these shots, it would work to the film's advantage, since the water around the Deez was meant to be polluted. The Mariner re-emerges on the surface of the water, now disguised as a smoker. As the Deacon continues to give his sermon, the Mariner rides one of the jet skis to the Deez launch port, and from out of the fog, drives the jet ski up a launch ramp and smashes into a smoker mechanic, pinning him against a beam. And can I mention, this is one of my favorite uses of a dummy in a movie. Just look at that little arm wiggle. In the extended cut of the film, we are treated to a little extra dialogue in this scene, where 2 other smokers emerge and, seeing the Mariner has killed the smoker known as Smitty, begin to rejoice, believing this has relieved them of their duties on the launch part. The Mariner then makes his way up to the top deck of the Deez through the bowels of the ship. In the extended cut, the Mariner is frightened by a speaker that is broadcasting the Deacon's sermon, to which he swiftly chops it off the wall with a machete. Up in the Deacon's quarters on the bridge of the ship, the Nord is helping himself to some more Black Death vodka, while Enola delivers an epic monologue on the excellence of the Mariner, while we intercut between the Mariner sneaking his way through the interior of the ship and being followed by the now alarmed band of smokers. In the book, Enola has actually been intoxicated by the dock's pufferfish venom while she's doling out this monologue. At the Deacon's signal, the Nord grabs Enola and brings her onto the balcony overlooking the deck of the Deez. The Deacon whips the crowd into a state of hysteria as he presents the map to dry land on Enola's back. Channeling the crowd's energy, he demands that the smokers begin rowing, even though he has not yet found the actual direction to dry land. At this, the smokers begin descending into the interior of the Deez and taking to their rowing stations. These interior 60-foot-long rowing stations were built in the city of Commerce, and for some shots were filmed with a blue screen at the far end, so that in post-production the set could be stacked end on end, making the room look far deeper. And at this point, I have to start mentioning the incredible miniature effects work that was used to bring the Deez to life, though we have already looked at a few of these shots prior in the video. To create the full shots of the Deez, a 112-foot long, 20-foot wide, and 12-foot high miniature was constructed. In terms of commercial ocean vessels, anything over 100 feet is considered a ship, so technically the miniature of the Deez qualifies as a full ship, even though it never touched water. Due to the limited room on the shop floor, 10 12-foot sections were built under the supervision of Mark Stetson and Robert Spurlock in Stetson Visual's Los Angeles shop, and was the last and largest single object produced by that visual effects studio. The designs of the miniature were checked to be structurally sound by Paul Stetson, Mark Stetson's father, who was an aerospace engineer living in Massachusetts. The main structure was constructed of steel and covered with wood panels and then sheathed with a thin metal. Polyester barnacle panels were textured with spray-on foam, sculpted with sandblasters, painted, and then fixed to the waterline of the tanker. The sections were loaded onto flatbed trucks and transported to an airfield a few hours away in the Mojave Desert. The model builders made frequent trips to the Commerce set to take photographs and make sure that objects on set, like the placement of cargo containers, would be reproduced accurately on the miniature. Even where the sun was in the sky was taken into close consideration to make sure that the film editors could intercut between the live-action set and the miniature seamlessly. Ironically, shooting the miniature ship in the middle of the desert proved to be the perfect place to capture this sea vessel, giving the crew ample space, a clear horizon, and predictable elements like wind speed. And although the miniatures were shot out in the desert, with the work of Maclifx they were composited into live-action background plates of the ocean and then tied together by Arete Associates and Cinesite, who added CGI whitewater simulations to the side and off the bow of the ship. And not only are parts of the water CGI, but also the oars sticking out of the sides and the water interacting with them as well. Though it should be noted that there are production stills of the crew experimenting with real miniature oars. The result is a very convincing shot of the Deez being rowed that stands the test of time, but more on these miniatures in just a moment. In the novelization, the movement of the Deez is also assisted with tugboats pulling at the bow of the ship. After the smokers have left the top deck, the mariner saunters out into the open and addresses the Deacon straight on. The Deacon says the mariner is like a turd that won't flush, which was censored in the TV version, but ultimately implies that there may be working plumbing somewhere on the Deez. The mariner gives the Deacon an ultimatum. Either he releases Enola, or he drops a flare down the pipe leading to the oil reserves. When the Deacon hesitates, the mariner drops the flare, which lands in the oily lake below, and we see once again our friend the human depth gauge, just a moment before he's incinerated. And I have to mention, it appears that the pipe leading to the deck of the Deez is the same pipe that leads to the storeroom earlier in the film. The oil ignites and explodes, sending a blast of fire out from the reserves and putting the ship into total chaos. Again, many of the wide shots of the Deez exploding are the work of the miniature effects team, and in fact, 4 miniatures of the Deez were created. One was considered the hero structure, made of plywood and intended to read most authentically on film. It was used for the wide beauty shots of the Deez, as well as many of the explosion and sinking shots. The miniature was rigged with over 80 explosion and fire effects. These systems allowed the crew to control the exploding and burning of the miniature repeatedly from multiple different camera angles. 3 other balsa wood models, only 2 of which I believe were used, were created specifically for the pyrotechnics involved with the Deez's final explosion. They were laced with primacord and gas mortars by a crew of 30 miniature effects artists. The team avoided using screws, instead building with glue. Seams were covered with dry spaghetti and textured over. The spaghetti would shatter when exploded, looking spectacular on film. They also covered the wood with foil so that the explosions would tear more like sheet metal. The team also scattered 20th scale smoker bodies across the deck during these explosion shots. According to the Making of Waterworld book, a total of 40 puppets were created from latex and polyfoam, some of which could be posed with armatures and others with lead in their feet and hands so that they would tumble more like real bodies. But regardless of all this effort to create the miniature smokers, hardly any of them can be seen in the final film. Mark Vargo was assigned to be the director of photography of the Deez unit, which also began shooting in January of 1995. He used primo lenses and selected angles to create a sense of enormity when shooting the miniatures. To detonate the explosions, the Pyrotechnics team added fire injection systems, electrical igniting systems, air systems, backup fans, and air mortars for burning debris. The flame movement had to be captured at 5 times speed by the camera so that when it was played back at normal speed, the fire would move realistically to the miniature scale. It also should be noted that many of the explosions and black smoke, which was deemed to be a health hazard to actually have on set, were shot as separate stage elements in the desert and then matted into the final shots with the miniature as well as the set in Commerce. After the chain reaction of explosions have been let loose, the Mariner escapes into the bowels of the Deez, where he uses a pulley system to bring him back towards the bridge of the ship. The band of smokers searching for the Mariner finally spot him and shoot the chain that he's climbing on, sending him swinging down into the path of the Deacon mobile, which crashes into a large beam with the Nord aboard. The Mariner finally makes it to the top of the bridge, and he realizes that the Deacon and Enola are down on the main deck attempting to escape in the smoker scout plane. A bloody Nord pops out onto the balcony and is quickly dispatched by the Mariner. The Mariner harpoons a pole on the far side of the deck, setting up a slide for life as he chases down the skyboat. As he glides down the cable, the explosions behind the Mariner are on a time sequence and filmed with a long lens to give the illusion that the explosions are happening directly behind him. On an effects-heavy day, the Waterworld crew burnt upwards of 900 gallons of propane on background explosions during the filming in the city of Commerce. The Mariner uses the hook he slides on to snag the landing gear of the plane, sending it gliding and crashing back down to the deck of the Deez. For a deeper dive into this sequence with the pontoon plane and the Mariner Slide for Life stunt, check out my video on everything we know about the Smoker Scout plane here on this channel. Though I do have one correction to make from that video concerning this shot with the Mariner running out in front of the Smoker Skyboat. This is actually another composite trick where the Mariner was captured with a dolly shot on the Commerce set, and later the dolly move was matched with a lightweight motion control system on a plane that was taking off from the tarmac in the Mojave Desert. The plane was then matted into the first shot, and it's pretty seamless, with perhaps only a slightly shaky digital shadow giving away the effect. The Mariner and Enola are reunited, but their joyful reunion is quickly interrupted as the Deez begins to tip upwards and slip beneath the water. Early in production, the miniature crew had planned to have the Deez break in the center and jackknife back into the water. Because of this, the model was designed to separate in the middle into 2 major sections. As plans evolved, however, they simplified the sequence by just having the stern of the ship raise up. They accomplished this with a 100-ton construction crane which lifted the 1,600-pound miniature. 2 cameras captured the action, one at deck level and another further back on a crane. In the Making of Waterworld book and some other production notes, it describes a ring of fire that was drawn up around the ship to simulate it sinking beneath a burning oil slick, but it seems that this work never made it to the final cut of any version of the film. The Mariner and Enola are rescued by Helen, Gregor, and the Enforcer, piloting the dirigible as the Deez's stern begins to go vertical. As they're being pulled aboard the aircraft, the Deez erupts into one final explosion, sending fire and debris into the air. The ship finally slips beneath the surface of the water, giving us one last glimpse of the stern and the name imprinted there, that being Exxon Valdez. And this, of course, is quite an ironic revelation as we realize that the smokers are in fact living upon the famed oil tanker that struck the Prince William Sound's Bligh Reef in Alaska in 1989, spilling over 10 million gallons of crude oil into the Pacific Ocean. This spill is considered one of the worst oil spills in human history in terms of damage to the environment. And lo and behold, the smoker's patron saint and the photograph that the Deacon communes with is none other than the captain of the Exxon Valdez during that cataclysmic shipwreck, that being Joe Hazelwood. Captain Hazelwood was accused of being drunk the night of the crash, but claimed that the Exxon Corporation was using him as a scapegoat, and he was cleared of this charge in a trial in 1990. And evidently the smokers too turned a blind eye to the Hazelwood controversy, choosing to make the defamed captain the guardian angel of their society. The filmmakers behind Waterworld did not know until shortly before shooting if they would be able to use the Valdez or Joe Hazelwood's likeness, but I'm so glad that they did, since I believe this detail really adds to the lore of Waterworld. But interestingly, the novelization of Waterworld makes no direct reference of the ship actually being the ancient ruins of the Exxon Valdez. Though I think it's worth noting, a year after the Exxon Valdez disaster, the ship was repaired and renamed the Exxon Mediterranean and shifted to operate in the waters of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. She was later reassigned to Asian shipping routes, where she was renamed the Dongfang Ocean, where she had a second tragedy, colliding with another bulk carrier in the Yellow Sea. After this, she was renamed again to the Oriental Nicety and beached and dismantled in India in 2012. So it would seem that the Deez in Waterworld exists in a parallel universe to our own, where the Exxon Valdez was never renamed or met its bitter end in 2012. Either that or the smokers reappropriated this or another oil tanker as the Exxon Valdez. Another small side tangent but worth noting here is that Kevin Costner himself was very disturbed by the Exxon Valdez disaster, so much so that he bought a company called Ocean Therapy Solutions for $24 million in 1995. This company creates specialty machines to help clean ocean water after an oil spill disaster and were utilized in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010 during the British petroleum leak. I actually suspect that Costner's passion for marine conservation is probably what got him initially interested in taking on the film Waterworld in the first place. And in fact, the design of the miniature Deez was created to be a very accurate 1/8 scale replica of the actual Exxon Valdez ship. The model designers attempted to track down the original blueprints but found no public records remained. Instead, they were able to turn up the measurements of the Valdez sister ship, the Arco Independence, from a fellow ship model builder, and were even invited to take a trip to tour her in Long Beach, California. The model builders also had to bring into consideration the large-scale set built in the city of Commerce to make sure that it matched with the miniature. In the end, since the large set was built to its own dimensions, the miniature became a cross between the actual Valdez and the set built in Commerce. But regardless, a 10-foot section of the miniature's very end was removed and emblazoned with the name Exxon Valdez and weighed with steel, then submerged with a crane system in a 35-foot wide by 18-foot deep pool dug at the Mojave site, which was reinforced with rebar and spray concrete and had propane gas lines installed to create the fire on the surface of the water. The pool gives us the final image of the Deez enveloped by the waves of Waterworld, a fitting send-off for this fabled smoker fortress. But of course, this is not the end of the video, as us Waterworld fans are curious about where else we see the Deez in the expanded lore of Waterworld, and what happened to the movie sets and miniature after the production of the film wrapped. Well, let's first take a look at Peter Rader's original Waterworld script, where we also find a large tanker in the final act of the story. This tanker, known as the USS Bridgeton, however, is not occupied by smoker pirates but rather a sole occupant, Cornelius Funky, an eccentric loner that gives shelter to the main characters in the story. The ship is invaded by pirates as our heroes make their final stand, and many of the details from this early script make their way into the final film, like using the deck as a runway for an airplane and the ship exploding and sinking at the very end with the pirates aboard. Looking at the video games of Waterworld, the Deez can be found in the final level of both the Super Nintendo game and the Sega Genesis game. In the video demo of the unreleased Atari Jaguar on-rail shooter game, we get a quick glimpse of the Deez and enter into its launch port. Also, in this gaming magazine, you can see that the on-rail shooter would have taken us onto the top deck of the Deez, where you can also see the Smoker scout plane. And it's interesting to note that the live-action cutscenes in the PC game, Waterworld: The Quest for Dry Land, reuse crowd shots of the smokers aboard the Deez from the film, but instead passes them off as Atollers listening to a speech given by Zake Smokey, playing an Atoll elder. Turning to the Waterworld board game produced by Milton Bradley, the entire objective of the game is to find and destroy the Deez, allowing the player to take control of the compass which shows the direction to dry land. The board game has this fantastically illustrated game piece that represents the Deez on the playboard. Looking at the top playfield of the Waterworld pinball game is a sculpted model of the Atoll, which will flip when the player activates the Sink the Deez minigame, where the player must lock in 4 balls on top of the Deez to sink it, giving you a bonus and releasing all the balls at once. Checking out the Fleer Ultra trading cards, you may be surprised to learn that the Deez does not have its own special card like the Atoll, Dirigible, Refueler Barge, Trimaran, or even Recycling Machine do. Perhaps this is because much of the filming of the Deez was done at the very end of the film's production as the cards went to print. But even without its own card, it appears on a ton of the plot point cards and some of the behind the scenes cards. One of the most interesting cards is card 100, Flame Out, which seems to show a woman and a child being engulfed by fire, a shot not seen in the film, and it really makes you wonder how many innocent people did the mariner probably kill by tossing his flare into the oil tank. The Waterworld Pog series also does not have a huge showing of the Deez, but a few Deez Pogs are sprinkled into the collection, like numbers 29 through 32. And in the Waterworld comic book series, the Deez is only briefly mentioned by the Leviathan as he's manifesting a premonition for his closest followers, known as his Deacons. This of course implies that the Deacon of the Deez was actually one of several elite Leviathan underlings. The Leviathan even says that the Deacon of the Deez was the greatest of them all, and interestingly, the Leviathan calls the Deez by its actual name, Valdez. But before I close this video out, I have to tell the incredible story about what happened to the Deez after the filming of Waterworld wrapped in 1995. While I could not find any information about what happened to the interior sets or the large set in the city of Commerce, I think it's safe to say that they were most likely dismantled and recycled to clear studio space for future films. But what I really want to talk about is what happened to the 112-foot miniature that was filmed in the Mojave Desert. With Waterworld being the last film that Stetson Visuals worked on before they closed their doors and dissolved the company, the miniature of the Deez had no home to return to. Instead, after the shooting was finished, the miniature was put to rest in the aircraft boneyard on the far side of the Mojave airport. And there it lay for nearly 20 years, the vessel rusting and rotting away in the middle of the desert, and over the years it could even be seen from Google Earth, tucked underneath the wing of a 747 jet passenger plane, wasting away. It was not until 2014 that the miniature of the Deez was purchased by post-apocalyptic artist Ron Griffith for $1. He had 3 months to move the structure or it would be scrapped and never seen again. Ron Griffith's plan was to transport the vessel to the site of Wasteland Weekends, a yearly celebration of post-apocalyptic aesthetic founded in 2009, which also takes place in the Mojave Desert. He teamed up with vehicle coordinator for the event, Paul Miller, to help with the undertaking. And in fact, Miller is a fan of the Atoll YouTube channel and reached out to me directly with the rest of the story. Upon inspecting the Deez, he found that the desert elements had not been kind to the structure. It was also deemed that the entire 112-foot vessel was too large and costly to move to Wasteland Weekends. This is when Miller decided to create the Deez Jr., a slimmed-down version of the Deez which removed the long middle section but preserved the bow and the stern to look like the center was torn out, creating a desert shipwreck. On a 116-degree day, Miller and a team of volunteers cut apart the model and transported them back to California City to be prepped for Wasteland Weekends. Miller raised $3,000 with an Indiegogo so that he could build and refurbish the bow and the stern on large trailers so that they could be easily transported to and from the event location. The Deez Jr. made its premiere in 2015's Wasteland Weekends as the stage for the swimsuit contest and birthed a new Wasteland tribe, the Disciples of the Deez. Over the next 5 years, the stage would become a chief location at the event, with additions being added each year like higher platforms, 4 side water cannons, and the large bow-mounted water cannon. However, the transporting and the elements of the desert environment took their toll on the Deez Jr., and in 2019, with the wood warping and cracking, the bow caving in, and the overbuilt metal framing collapsing the traveling trailer it sat on, it was decided by the disciples of the Deez to retire the impressive stage. And so, after Wasteland Weekends 2019 ended, the Deez Jr. was cut apart and sent off to be recycled. And though the Deez is no longer, the nameplate on its stern will live on in the Wasteland Weekends on-site museum. And you may be surprised to learn the Deez also lives on in my apartment. That's right, friend of the channel and knowledgeable Waterworld fan himself, Jamie Going, acquired several sheets of metal siding and a piece of the propeller from the Deez Jr. and was incredibly kind and sent me one of his spare pieces of siding. And while some may see this as simply a rusty piece of metal, I see it as an incredible piece of 90s Hollywood history. It is truly an honor to own a piece of this legendary movie miniature. And there you have it, that is everything we know about the Smoker Lair, known as the Deez. Completing this video represents one of the biggest goals for me here on this channel, and I am so glad to have finally shared this story with you. Thank you to everybody that has supported me here by leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment or question below. That always really means a lot to me and never goes unnoticed. And if you haven't already, I would greatly appreciate your subscription to this channel. We are just under 1,000 subscribers, a huge milestone for this channel, and I would love to see us get there before the end of the year. Thank you again to everybody that has subscribed and followed along with me on this journey. But also, follow the Atoll on Instagram for even more Waterworld content and updates on future videos. We have lots more planned, so stay tuned. But with that, thanks, as always, for joining me at the Atoll.